The roar of the alien ship's engines echoed through the endless void of space. Its sleek, metallic body glided silently toward Earth's atmosphere. It was a vessel of superior design, far beyond anything humanity had ever created. The aliens on board, confident in their advanced technology, believed they would easily claim Earth as their own. But they couldn't have been more wrong. In the depths of the ship, Commander Taller stood, watching the planet below with anticipation. His species, the Therians, had watched Earth for decades. From their remote vantage point in space, they had studied human behavior, culture, and technology. They were the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, capable of wiping out entire planets with ease. And they had decided it was time to add Earth to their collection of conquests. "Prepare for descent," Taller commanded, his voice calm, betraying no hint of uncertainty. His hand hovered over the control panel, and the ship's engines shifted gears, adjusting to the gravitational pull of Earth. The crew around him worked silently, their faces hidden behind the glow of their high-tech screens. The Therians had arrived, and they were ready to claim Earth's resources. But as the ship hurtled closer to Earth's surface, something unexpected happened. "Commander, we've encountered an anomaly," one of his officers reported, his voice tinged with confusion. Taller narrowed his eyes. "What kind of anomaly?" The officer glanced at his screen, then quickly turned to Taller. "I'm detecting an energy source, human-made, but far more advanced than anything we've observed before. It's powerful." Taller's brow furrowed. The Therians had been monitoring Earth's technology for years, and while humans had made great strides, they were still a primitive species compared to the Therians. Yet, this new energy signature, something they couldn't explain, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. "Show me," Taller ordered. The officer quickly projected the data onto the main screen. The energy source appeared as a pulsing orb of light, flickering with strange patterns. It didn't make sense. How could humans have developed something like this without the Therians noticing? "Target the source. We need to understand it," Taller said, his tone now sharp with suspicion. He gestured for the ship's weapons officer to lock onto the energy signal. But as the weapon systems engaged, the unexpected happened again. The entire ship shook violently, the walls groaning under the pressure. The lights flickered, and alarms blared throughout the vessel. "What's happening?" Taller demanded, gripping the edge of the console. "We're losing power. The energy signature, it's fighting back," the officer stammered. Before Taller could respond, the ship was jolted once more, this time harder. The entire crew was thrown from their seats, crashing into the floor as the ship spiraled out of control. A massive explosion erupted from the core, and Taller watched in horror as the once pristine exterior of the ship was torn apart by an invisible force. The last thing he saw before everything went black was Earth's blue-and-green surface growing larger in the view screen. Taller woke up in a haze, disoriented. The sound of crackling fire and the smell of burning metal filled the air. He struggled to stand, his legs weak beneath him. The damage to the ship was catastrophic. The once gleaming hull was now a twisted, broken shell. The lower half of the ship was completely gone, and smoke poured from every crevice. His crew members were either unconscious or dead. There were no signs of the ship's advanced systems working anymore. The Therians, for the first time in their long history, were at a loss. Taller stumbled through the wreckage, his mind racing. "What happened?" he muttered to himself. How did humans do this?" He staggered toward the control room, which was in ruins. Broken monitors and twisted metal lay scattered across the floor. There was no sign of the energy source that had torn their ship apart. Then, in the far corner of the room, he noticed something that froze him in place. A small, human-made device, far too primitive to cause the kind of destruction they had just experienced, was lying amidst the debris. It was a simple radio transmitter. A relic from Earth's past, left behind by a long-forgotten age. But the signal it emitted wasn't simple at all. Talar knelt down beside the device, his hands trembling. As he picked it up, a series of strange symbols began to flicker on the screen. They weren't any language he recognized. Yet, for a moment, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something was watching him. Without warning, a voice boomed through the ship's broken communication system. "Therians, your arrogance has sealed your fate." The voice was unmistakable, carrying the weight of power and ancient knowledge. It wasn't human. It was something else. Something much older and far more terrifying than the Therians could ever comprehend. "You have underestimated humanity," the voice continued, cold and deliberate. "And now you will pay the price." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Talar in stunned silence. "What in the galaxy?" he whispered. But the terror had only just begun. The device pulsed once more, its signal growing stronger. It was as if the very planet itself had become a weapon, one that humans had unknowingly activated. Back on Earth, in a quiet underground facility deep in the mountains, a group of humans monitored the event unfold. They had been prepared for something like this, though they never expected it would happen so soon. The leader of the group, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a stern expression, stood in front of a massive screen. His eyes narrowed as he watched the destruction of the Therian ship. "It's time," he muttered to himself. "The experiment is about to begin." The others in the room nodded solemnly, their faces set in determination. They had been waiting for years, preparing for this moment. The Therians thought they were the hunters, but they had no idea who the real predators were. "Activate the protocol," the leader ordered. A series of clicks echoed through the room, and on the screen, an intricate pattern of symbols appeared, symbols that had been passed down through generations, a code that humans had long since abandoned. It was a code that linked them to an ancient, forgotten past. The leader's eyes gleamed with a knowing look. "We are the ultimate predators. And now, the universe will know it." Back in the wreckage of the Therian ship, Talar staggered to his feet, still reeling from the voice he had just heard. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. The ship was lost. His crew was dead. Earth was still far away, but there was no way they would make it back now. His species, so proud and confident, had been humbled by the very humans they had come to conquer. "Commander," a voice called from behind him. Talar turned to see one of his surviving officers, bloodied and battered but alive. "Commander, we need to leave. The planet, it's not safe. The humans have triggered something. We don't know what it is, but we can't stay here." Talar's eyes hardened. He had never seen fear in his officer's eyes before. But now, he could see it. Fear of humans. Fear of something much greater than they could comprehend. "Get to the escape pods," Talar commanded. "We'll figure this out when we're away from here." But as the officer turned to leave, another explosion rocked the ship. Talar grabbed the officer's arm, pulling him back. "Stay with me. We can't leave yet." And then, everything changed. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, sending both of them crashing to the floor. A bright, blinding light flooded the room. The humans had just begun to show their true power. And it was far more terrifying than the Therians could ever have imagined. The explosion had left the remnants of the Therian ship in chaos. The blinding light that had filled the command room slowly faded, but the ground continued to tremble beneath Talar's feet. The very air seemed charged with a strange energy, an energy that had not come from any of the Therians' advanced weapons or technology. It was something else entirely. Talar's mind raced. The escape pods were their only chance now, but the shaking was growing worse. The ship's internal systems were beyond repair, and the crew had no way to contact anyone outside their crippled vessel. They were alone. But it wasn't just isolation that gnawed at him. It was the overwhelming sense that they were being watched, as if something, someone, was pulling the strings from the shadows. "Commander," his officer shouted again, his voice cracking with fear. Talar turned to look at the officer, his jaw clenched. "We need to move, now." The officer nodded, but Talar could see the hesitation in his eyes. Fear. The kind of fear he had never seen in a Therian before. Fear of the unknown, of something even more powerful than they were. He followed Talar as they made their way through the wreckage of the ship. Every step seemed to bring them closer to some unseen danger, something lurking just beyond their understanding. They reached the escape pods after what felt like hours. The ship had been designed for a crew of hundreds, but now, only a handful remained alive. Talar's thoughts were foggy. The destruction of their ship, the mysterious energy pulse, and the cryptic voice that had spoken to them, it was all too much to comprehend. How had the humans done this? What had they activated? The escape pods were functional but barely. The damage to the ship's central systems had left the pods with limited navigation. Still, they were their only hope for survival. "Get in. We're launching now," Talar commanded, his voice cold and firm. The officer obeyed, but his hands shook as he secured his harness. Talar sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The launch sequence was simple, but his mind kept drifting back to the mysterious energy signature and the ominous voice that had spoken. It wasn't human. He was sure of that. But why would it choose to speak to them, to warn them? "Commander," the officer's voice broke through his thoughts, "are we going to make it? The humans, they're coming for us, aren't they?" Talar's eyes narrowed. The officer was right to be afraid. But there was more to this than they understood. The humans weren't just coming for them, they were coming for something bigger. Something none of the Therians had ever expected. "We need to find out what happened here," Talar said, his voice steady. "We need to survive, first. Then, we'll figure out what they've done." The escape pod's thrusters ignited, propelling them away from the wreckage of their ship. They shot through the void, heading toward Earth. It felt like the journey would never end, the blackness of space stretching endlessly around them. But as they approached the planet, something unusual happened. The pod systems blinked. A warning signal flashed on the screen. "Warning, unknown signal detected. Source, Earth," the display read. Talar's breath caught in his throat. Another pulse of energy? Was it the same signal that had destroyed their ship? Before he could respond, the officer screamed. "Commander, look!" Talar's gaze snapped to the window. Earth's surface was visible, but something was wrong. The planet wasn't what it should have been. There was a strange shimmer in the atmosphere, a distortion that made the planet look like it was surrounded by an invisible barrier. It was as if the very air around it had been altered, warped. "What is that?" Talar whispered. The officer's eyes were wide with terror. It's like the atmosphere is alive. It's reacting to us." Talar clenched his fists. He had seen many strange things in his time, but nothing like this. Nothing that could explain what he was witnessing now. "We have to land," Talar said, his voice shaking only slightly. "We have to find out what's happening on the surface." The escape pod touched down on a barren stretch of land just outside a large human settlement. The surface of Earth looked much like any other planet they had encountered. Deserted, scarred by time, but still teeming with life. Talar couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker than simple survival awaited them here. As the pod door opened, the harsh winds of Earth hit Talar's face, reminding him that he was no longer in control. He was a guest on this planet, and the hosts were far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The officer stood beside him, looking uncertain. "What now, Commander?" "We find out who, or what, is responsible for this," Talar replied, his voice low. "And we make them pay for what they did to us." The two Therians moved cautiously through the barren landscape, their senses heightened. Every rustle of wind, every snap of a twig, had them on edge. It was a quiet kind of fear. The kind that made you feel like you were never truly alone. The kind that made you question if the shadows were moving of their own accord. Hours passed, and the landscape began to change. The barren wasteland gradually gave way to a small human settlement. The buildings were primitive, but functional. The kind of structures humans had constructed before they had advanced beyond their primitive technology. But there was something off about this place. There were no people. No signs of life. The streets were empty, the windows dark. It was as if the settlement had been abandoned long ago. "We're not alone," Tyler muttered under his breath. He could feel it in his bones. They crept into the heart of the settlement, moving silently through the abandoned streets. The buildings seemed to close in on them, the shadows growing longer with each step. Something was waiting for them. At the center of the settlement stood a large, crumbling structure, a monument of some kind. Tyler's eyes narrowed. The structure had been constructed from materials far more advanced than anything humans should have been capable of. It was intricate, alien even, though it seemed to belong on Earth. "What is this?" the officer whispered. Tyler approached the monument cautiously. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but his curiosity pushed him forward. There was something important about this place. Something hidden beneath the surface that he needed to uncover. He reached out to touch the structure, and as soon as his fingers made contact, a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The ground beneath their feet trembled once again. Tyler recoiled, his heart racing. "Commander, what is happening?" the officer cried out in fear. Tyler's mind raced as the hum grew louder. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. The ground was still. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the structure began to glow. A soft, pulsating light emanated from within, and a holographic image appeared above it. The figure that appeared was unlike anything Tyler had ever seen. It was humanoid, but its features were strange and distorted, as though it didn't quite belong to this world. The figure spoke, its voice echoing through the settlement. "Therians, you have trespassed on Earth. You have awoken the true guardians of this planet." The voice was cold and ancient, and it carried an authority that Tyler had never encountered before. This was not a human voice. This was something older, more powerful. "You will not leave," the voice continued. "And you will never be allowed to take what is ours." The hologram flickered, then vanished. Tyler stood in stunned silence. The officer was shaking beside him, his face pale with fear. "What was that?" the officer whispered. Tyler's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with realization. That was no human. Whatever this planet's guardians are, they are far beyond anything we've ever known. They had awoken something ancient. And now, it was coming for them. The hum had died down, but the feeling of dread remained, thick in the air. The words of the mysterious figure echoed in Tyler's mind, "You have awoken the true guardians of this planet." The monument in front of them was still glowing faintly, and the ground trembled underfoot. Tyler stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. The officer beside him was still shaking, visibly rattled by the encounter. Fear gripped him, but Tyler knew they had no choice but to press forward. "We need to move," Tyler said, his voice steady, though the tremor in his gut betrayed him. "We need to figure out what we've unleashed." The officer nodded, but his eyes darted nervously around the abandoned settlement. "Commander, what are we dealing with? That was no human. And those guardians? What do they want with us?" Tyler gritted his teeth, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. The only thing he knew for sure was that the Therians were no longer the top predators in this galaxy. Something had stirred on Earth, something that had been dormant for far too long. "We don't know yet," Tyler muttered. "But whatever it is, it's not just going to let us leave." With that grim realization hanging in the air, the two of them began to move cautiously through the settlement, the eerie silence surrounding them like a suffocating fog. Every creak of the building and rustle of the wind made them jump. The settlement, though empty, felt alive with a presence they couldn't yet understand. The hologram, the voice, the sudden energy pulse, it all pointed to something far greater than they could comprehend. And Tyler knew that they had unknowingly triggered something ancient, something that could very well destroy them. Hours passed as they explored the settlement, but the truth was they weren't getting anywhere. There were no signs of human life, no clear answers to the growing mystery. It was as though the place had been abandoned long ago, leaving only the haunting remnants of a forgotten civilization. Tyler stopped in front of a large, half-collapsed building, its crumbling walls barely holding together. A set of strange markings was etched into the structure, faint but still visible. He stepped forward to inspect them, tracing his fingers over the ancient symbols. They were unlike anything he'd seen before. No known language. No familiar writing system. Just a series of interconnected lines and geometric shapes that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. "What is this?" the officer asked, his voice tinged with fear. Tyler stared at the symbols. They were calling to him, drawing him in, but he couldn't understand why. He felt a pull deep inside, a sensation that made him feel both terrified and compelled to learn more. "There's something here," Tyler said softly, his mind working overtime. "Something important." Suddenly, the officer gasped, pointing to the sky. Tyler looked up, and his heart dropped into his stomach. A strange, dark shape was descending toward them from above, cutting through the atmosphere with eerie precision. It was massive, too massive to be human-made. The object shimmered, its outline faint, but Tyler could see it clearly. This was no mere ship. It was something far more advanced. "What in the stars is that?" the officer whispered, his voice barely audible. Tyler's gaze never wavered. The object was moving steadily toward the ground, heading straight for the center of the settlement. He could feel his pulse quicken, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Whatever it wasn't friendly. "We need to get to cover," Tyler ordered, his voice hard. "Now!" The two of them rushed to find shelter inside a nearby building, ducking behind the remnants of a collapsed wall as the object grew closer. They could hear the faint hum of its engines, growing louder with each passing second. Tyler's thoughts raced. If this was another attack from the Guardians, they were already out of their depth. They couldn't face an enemy that had access to technology like that. The ship landed with a soft thud, not far from where they had taken cover. Tyler's eyes were fixed on the dark shape, every muscle in his body tense. The air around them seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. Then, without warning, the doors of the ship opened. What stepped out of the ship was unlike anything Tyler had ever seen. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its proportions were wrong. Its skin was an unnatural shade of dark blue, and its eyes glowed with a piercing white light. It was tall, at least 8 feet, towering over the two Therians, and its limbs were long and thin, almost insect-like. It wore armor, but the material was unlike anything Tyler could identify. It shimmered, shifting like liquid metal, responding to the creature's every movement. The officer beside Tyler gasped, but Tyler didn't dare make a sound. The creature's gaze scanned the surroundings, its head tilting slightly as if sensing their presence. It moved with unnerving precision, each step calculated, purposeful. This was no ordinary alien. This was something far more dangerous. The creature spoke in a low, guttural language, its voice like a growl, deep and resonating. Tyler didn't understand a word of it, but the tone was unmistakable. Threatening. Without warning, the creature snapped its head in their direction, its glowing eyes locking onto theirs. A shiver ran down Tyler's spine as the creature seemed to detect them instantly, even though they were well hidden. The officer whispered frantically, "What do we do now, Commander?" Tyler's mind raced. They couldn't fight this thing. Not without knowing more about it. They couldn't even communicate. They needed to get back to the ship, but it was too far. And with this thing here, they were trapped. Before he could form a plan, the creature raised one long, skeletal hand, and Tyler felt an overwhelming pressure in the air. The ground beneath them began to shake once again. The creature's hand began to glow, and a crackling sound filled the air. Tyler instinctively braced himself, ready to move if necessary. The creature's eyes flashed a bright white, and with a sudden, violent burst of energy, the air around them exploded in a wave of force. The shockwave knocked Tyler and the officer off their feet, sending them sprawling across the ground. Tyler could barely make sense of what had just happened. The force of the impact was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if the very air had been turned into a weapon. When the world settled around him, Tyler struggled to his feet, shaking off the disorientation. His head spun, but he could still hear the creature moving, its steps deliberate, growing closer. "We need to run," the officer screamed, panic in his voice. But Tyler didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the creature, which was now standing directly in front of them, its long limbs moving in slow, deliberate motions. The officer stumbled to his feet, but Tyler remained still. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes studying them with an intensity that sent a chill down Tyler's spine. It was as if the creature knew exactly what they were thinking, as if it could read their very thoughts. And then, in a voice that was more like a command than a question, the creature spoke in a language that was incomprehensible. Tyler's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to end them. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest, each beat resonating in the silence that enveloped them. The creature, towering before them, had a presence that felt both alien and unnervingly familiar. The air around him shimmered, a strange force field of energy pulsing from his body. His eyes burned into Tyler's, cold and calculating, as if judging their every move. The officer beside Tyler, still gasping for breath, tried to stand, but his legs were shaky. The shockwave had nearly torn them apart. "Commander," the officer whispered, fear thick in his voice. "What do we do now?" Tyler didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The ship, the markings, the hologram, and now this creature, nothing made sense. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just another alien encounter. This was something much bigger. The creature's gaze never wavered, its eyes glowing like molten orbs. It tilted its head, studying them with what seemed like both curiosity and disdain. Then, slowly, it spoke. Its voice was a low hum, vibrating through the air with an unsettling power. The words were incomprehensible, each syllable a weight of authority. Tyler could feel the language resonate in his bones, like it was trying to communicate directly with his instincts rather than his mind. Suddenly, without warning, the creature stepped forward. Tyler instinctively moved into a defensive stance, ready for any sudden attack. But the creature didn't strike. Instead, it raised one long arm, the glowing aura around it intensifying. Then, the air shifted. Tyler's vision blurred for a moment, and he found himself standing in a different place. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the scene before him. The world around him was different, alien, yet familiar. He stood in the center of a vast, desolate landscape, stretching as far as the eye could see. Jagged mountains loomed in the distance, casting long shadows over the cracked, dry earth. The sky above was a deep, unnatural red, swirling with strange clouds that pulsed like living things. Tall, twisted structures rose in the distance, broken and crumbling as if abandoned long ago. The air was thick, heavy with an oppressive silence. "What is this?" Tyler whispered under his breath, his mind struggling to comprehend the sight. The officer was beside him now, but he was just as confused, staring wide-eyed at the strange surroundings. "Where are we? This doesn't make any sense." Tyler's gaze flickered to the creature standing just a few feet away. Its cold, calculating eyes locked with his, and for a brief moment, Tyler felt an unsettling connection. It was as if the creature was showing him something, guiding him, but also warning him. Then, without speaking, the creature gestured toward the horizon. Tyler didn't hesitate. His instincts kicked in, and he followed, his steps quick and determined. The officer trailed behind, still clearly unnerved by the surreal experience. They moved across the barren landscape, the ground beneath them shifting with every step, as if alive. There was no sign of life, no trace of vegetation. Just rocks, dust, and the remnants of long-forgotten ruins. The structures that dotted the landscape were towering and ancient, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. It was as though they had stumbled upon a long-dead civilization, its history written in the ruins of a forgotten world. But there was something else here, something far older than anything Tyler had ever encountered. A sense of power, ancient and overwhelming, seemed to hang in the air like an invisible storm cloud. The creature led them forward, unhurried, its glowing eyes never leaving Tyler's form. Despite the overwhelming feeling of dread that settled in his stomach, Tyler couldn't help but feel a pull toward whatever the creature was trying to show him. There was a purpose to all of this. They were here for a reason. After what felt like hours of walking, they arrived at a massive structure, one that towered over the landscape. It was unlike anything Tyler had seen before. The building was constructed from smooth, obsidian-like material, with no visible doors or windows. Strange, pulsating lights ran along its edges, casting eerie shadows across the ground. The creature stopped in front of the structure, turning its gaze toward Tyler. It spoke again, its words a low hum that seemed to vibrate in the air. Tyler tried to make sense of the language, but it was impossible. The words were foreign, and their meaning eluded him. The creature's voice was steady, almost as if it was giving instructions, but Tyler couldn't follow. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled again, a deep, resonant vibration that sent shockwaves through the air. Tyler staggered, grabbing onto a nearby stone pillar for support. The officer stumbled as well, his face pale with fear. The tremor subsided, but the air remained thick with tension. Tyler's heart raced, his mind alert and on edge. Something was coming. He could feel it. The creature stepped toward the structure, its movements slow and deliberate. Tyler followed instinctively, though the officer hesitated behind him. As they reached the base of the structure, the ground shifted once again, and a massive door, invisible before, slid open with a soft grinding sound. Inside the structure, the air was cool, heavy with a strange, metallic scent. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, just like those they had seen earlier. Tyler's eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of the alien technology around him. At the far end of the room, a massive, glowing object stood on a pedestal. It was spherical in shape, its surface smooth and dark, with an ethereal, almost liquid glow emanating from within. It was unlike anything Tyler had ever seen. The object seemed to pulse with an energy that was both inviting and terrifying. The creature moved toward the object, its movements fluid and graceful. It reached out, its long fingers brushing against the surface of the sphere. The moment its hand made contact, the room around them seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their light intensifying until the entire room was bathed in an otherworldly glow. Tyler stepped forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. As he approached the pedestal, the creature turned to face him. Its eyes locked with his once again, the weight of its gaze sending a chill down his spine. "Do you understand?" the creature asked, its voice now a deep, resonant hum. Tyler stared at the sphere. He could feel the power radiating from it, a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was ancient. It was alive. I don't understand," Tyler replied, his voice thick with disbelief. "What is this?" The creature's eyes narrowed. "This is the key," it said, its voice soft but firm. "The key to your survival." The words hung in the air like a dark omen. Tyler felt the weight of them settle in his chest. Survival? What did it mean? The creature's cryptic words only deepened the mystery. Before Tyler could ask another question, the room trembled once again. The ground beneath them shook, and a deep rumbling sound filled the air. The creature looked around, its expression unreadable. Then, in a swift motion, it turned and placed its hand on the sphere. A bright light erupted from the object, blinding Tyler and the officer. The light was overwhelming, searing through the darkness of the room like a beacon. Tyler shielded his eyes, struggling to comprehend what was happening. When the light finally dimmed, the creature was gone. In its place, a strange symbol was etched into the pedestal, glowing with an eerie blue light. Tyler's mind was spinning. What had just happened? Where had the creature gone? And why had it left them with only a symbol? The officer took a step forward, his voice shaky. "Commander, what the hell is going on? Where did it go?" Tyler looked down at the symbol, a cold shiver running down his spine. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But whatever it is, we're not leaving this place until we find out." The moment the creature vanished, the silence was deafening. The strange symbol etched into the pedestal glowed faintly in the center of the room, pulsing like a heartbeat. Tyler could still feel the aftershocks of the creature's presence, the weight of its gaze lingering in the air. His thoughts were a tangled mess, each one trying to break free and make sense of the chaos that had unfolded. The officer stepped closer to the pedestal, his hand hovering just above the symbol. He seemed unsure whether to touch it or not. Tyler's instinct told him to proceed with caution, but curiosity gnawed at him, urging him forward. Every fiber of his being screamed that they were on the edge of something massive, something they couldn't afford to ignore. Tyler took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing symbol. It seemed almost alive, shifting with a subtle energy that hummed in the air. He reached out, slowly, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the pedestal. Suddenly, the room around them seemed to shift. The walls warped, the symbols on them becoming more vivid, pulsating with a life of their own. A low rumble echoed in the distance, a deep, subterranean growl that reverberated through the floor beneath their feet. The officer stumbled back, his breath quickening in panic. "Commander, what's happening?" the officer gasped, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Tyler replied, his voice steady despite the rising panic inside him. "Stay calm. We need to figure out what's going on." Before Tyler could say another word, a deep voice filled the room. It wasn't the creature's voice, but something different. A hum, low and resonating, seemed to emerge from the very walls, vibrating through their bones. It was as if the room itself was speaking, its language alien yet familiar. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, the energy in the room intensifying until it felt suffocating. Tyler instinctively took a step back, but his gaze never left the pedestal. The symbol had changed. It was no longer just a simple marking. It had morphed, the lines twisting and shifting into a new shape, one that resembled a map, but of what? Tyler's heart raced. This was it. This was the answer they had been searching for. The officer turned to him, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Commander, what is that?" "It's like a map." Tyler nodded slowly, his mind racing. "It looks like a map of some kind, but it's not one I recognize." Suddenly, a low mechanical whirring filled the air, and the pedestal shifted, the surface of the symbol beginning to rotate. Tyler watched in awe as the symbol spun, the light it emitted growing brighter with each turn. The officer took a cautious step back, his eyes wide with both fear and fascination. "Is this what we were meant to find?" the officer asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I think so," Tyler replied, his eyes never leaving the rotating symbol. The air in the room grew thick, charged with an energy he couldn't fully understand. "I think this is the key." As the symbol spun faster, the walls around them seemed to come alive. The glowing symbols shifted, rearranging themselves into new patterns that Tyler could almost recognize. The symbols formed words, words that he could understand, but only just. The first word was simple, survival. The second word was more cryptic, sacrifice. The third was chilling, endurance. The final word left Tyler frozen in place, humanity. The room fell silent once more, the hum of the energy subsiding. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as he processed the words. Survival. Sacrifice. Endurance. Humanity. What did they mean? And why were they here, in this strange place, facing this unknown entity? The officer looked at him, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. Commander. What does it mean? What do we do now? Tyler's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The creature had said something about survival, hadn't it? But what about the other words? Was the creature trying to warn them, or was it pushing them towards something even more dangerous? Before Tyler could respond, the floor beneath them suddenly trembled again, stronger this time. The walls cracked, and a loud, grinding noise echoed through the room. Tyler barely had time to react before the pedestal split open, revealing a hidden chamber beneath. A dark abyss yawned beneath their feet, a deep, impenetrable blackness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Tyler's heart raced as he peered into the void, trying to discern what lay below. The officer stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" the officer whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Tyler said, his voice grim. "But I think we're about to find out." Without warning, the glowing map above them flickered, its light shifting once more. The lines of the map began to rearrange themselves, forming a new shape. It was as if the map was showing them a path, a way forward. Tyler took a deep breath. "We need to follow the path. This is our way out." The officer hesitated, clearly terrified. "Commander, this is crazy. We don't know where that path leads." "We don't have a choice," Tyler said, his voice firm. "We need to go." With that, Tyler stepped toward the abyss. He could feel the pull of the map, urging him onward, compelling him to step into the unknown. The officer followed, albeit reluctantly, his footsteps heavy behind Tyler. The path led them deeper into the structure, into the heart of the mystery. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The map on the pedestal above them continued to guide them, its light flashing with every step they took. After what felt like an eternity of walking, they arrived at a massive door. The door was unlike anything Tyler had seen before. It was made of the same obsidian-like material as the pedestal, but the surface was etched with strange, intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light. Tyler stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. The moment his skin made contact, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was another chamber, but this one was different. It was filled with advanced technology, machines, panels, and devices Tyler couldn't even begin to understand. In the center of the room stood a large, spherical object, similar to the one they had seen earlier. But this one was different. It was larger, more intricate, and pulsated with an energy that felt alive. Tyler approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The officer stayed behind, his fear palpable. "Commander, what is that?" the officer asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Tyler replied, his eyes fixed on the object. "But I think it's the key to everything." He reached out to touch it, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. The moment his skin made contact, the entire room seemed to come alive. The walls lit up with streams of energy, and the floor beneath them vibrated with power. A low hum filled the air as the object began to glow brighter, its energy intensifying. Then, the room went silent. The object stopped glowing, and the energy in the room dissipated. Tyler pulled his hand away, his breath coming in quick gasps. The officer stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What just happened?" the officer asked. Tyler didn't answer immediately. He was too stunned, too lost in the moment. The object, the map, the creature, it was all connected. But to what end? Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. It was the creature's voice again. "You have chosen," the voice intoned. Tyler froze. The creature's words hung in the air like a dark omen. "The path has been set." Tyler's hand hovered just above the strange, glowing object in the center of the chamber. The eerie voice that had filled the room moments before continued to echo in his mind. "The path has been set." The words reverberated in his chest, as if the very air itself was charged with their meaning. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine. What had he just awakened? What did the creature want from them? The officer, who had stayed behind in a daze, looked at Tyler as if waiting for a sign, a clue, anything to tell him what to do next. "What now, Commander?" The officer's voice was barely above a whisper, the uncertainty evident in his tone. Tyler slowly withdrew his hand from the glowing surface of the object, stepping back. The hum in the room had ceased, but the tension in the air seemed to linger, thick and oppressive. The officer's eyes were still fixed on the object, and Tyler could sense the fear in him, his unease growing with each passing second. "I don't know," Tyler admitted. His mind was racing, each thought a new question that he couldn't yet answer. What was this place? What was this object? Why had it called to them? Before he could process another thought, the room seemed to shift. The walls trembled slightly, as if something was moving beneath the structure, something ancient and powerful. Tyler glanced around, trying to make sense of the subtle vibrations, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Then, the voice echoed again. This time, it was clearer, more distinct. "You have unlocked the first gate." Tyler's heart skipped a beat. The first gate? Was this just the beginning? What was waiting for them on the other side? His thoughts were a whirlwind, but he couldn't ignore the strange pull he felt toward the center of the room. Toward the object. It was as if the entire structure was urging them forward, beckoning them deeper into its depths. The officer took a cautious step forward, his gaze never leaving the glowing sphere. "Do you think we're supposed to do something with it? Like activate it?" "I don't know," Tyler repeated, though he was less certain this time. He could feel the weight of the officer's question, the need for answers, the growing pressure to make a decision. Suddenly, the floor beneath them rumbled again, louder this time. The walls began to crack, and the chamber itself seemed to be alive, responding to whatever had been triggered by Tyler's touch. The officer stumbled back, his eyes wide in terror. "Commander, I don't think we should be here." "We have to," Tyler said, though even he wasn't entirely sure why. But something told him they were on the cusp of understanding something monumental. There was no turning back now. As the rumbling intensified, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden passage. The darkness beyond was impenetrable, but the faintest light seemed to pulse from within. Tyler felt the pull again, stronger than before. This was it. They had no choice but to follow. With a deep breath, Tyler stepped toward the passage, the officer following closely behind, though he still hesitated, clearly uncertain of the danger they were about to face. The passage was narrow, the walls smooth and cold to the touch. The air was stale, filled with the scent of earth and something ancient, something that hadn't seen the light of day in millennia. As they moved deeper into the darkness, the faint light grew stronger, guiding their way. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, but in reality, it was only a matter of minutes before they reached another chamber. This one was much larger, the ceiling so high that it disappeared into shadow. In the center of the room stood another object, this one far larger than the one they had seen before. It was a towering structure, pulsing with energy, a glowing mass of lines and symbols that seemed to shift and change with each passing moment. Taylor's heart raced as he approached the object, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The officer, who had been quiet up until this point, spoke in a voice barely audible. "Commander. What is that?" "I don't know," Taylor said, his voice thick with awe. "But it's part of something much bigger." The light from the object seemed to cast long, twisting shadows across the room, distorting the walls into strange shapes. Taylor reached out, his fingers brushing against the surface of the structure. The moment he made contact, the room seemed to come alive, the symbols on the object lighting up in a dizzying display of color. Suddenly, the voice returned, louder than ever. "You stand before the core." "The core?" Taylor whispered to himself. What was this core? And why had it been hidden away, buried beneath the earth? The answers were just beyond his reach, tantalizingly close yet still elusive. "The core holds the truth." The voice continued, its tone reverberating through the chamber like the rumble of thunder. "The truth you seek, the truth you have unlocked." Taylor's mind raced as the words sank in. This was it, the moment of revelation. They had uncovered something huge, something that could change everything they thought they knew. The core held the answers to all the questions that had been plaguing them, the answers to the mystery that had begun the moment they stepped into this place. "Commander," the officer's voice was shaky, his fear apparent. "We need to leave. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. We shouldn't be here." "We can't leave now," Taylor said, his voice steady despite the officer's growing panic. "We're so close. We can't stop now." The officer opened his mouth to protest but seemed to think better of it. He looked away, his expression darkening as he glanced at the towering structure before them. The room was silent again, the only sound the faint hum of the energy emanating from the object. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Taylor took a step forward, then another, until he was standing directly in front of the core. He could feel the heat of its energy radiating off of it, a force that seemed to stir something deep within him. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what was happening. "The path is clear," the voice intoned again, its tone echoing in the vast chamber. "You must choose." "Choose?" Taylor muttered under his breath. What was he supposed to choose? Was it a choice between unlocking the truth and letting it stay buried? Or was there something more, something far greater at stake? He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it approached the core. The moment his fingers made contact, the chamber seemed to shake violently, the walls cracking as the very ground beneath their feet quaked. The energy within the core surged, growing brighter, more intense. Taylor stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from the object. The voice spoke again, but this time, it was different. It was more urgent, almost desperate. "The choice is yours. But know this, once you unlock the truth, there is no going back." Taylor's heart raced as he considered the weight of the words. Once he unlocked the truth, there would be no turning back. But did he even have a choice? He glanced over at the officer, who seemed paralyzed by fear, his eyes wide with uncertainty. There was no time to waste. Taylor had to act now, or the opportunity would slip away. With a steadying breath, Taylor reached for the core again, his fingers brushing against its surface. This time, the energy surged violently, and the walls around them cracked open, revealing a vast, cavernous space. The core blazed with a light so bright that it seemed to swallow everything around them. The air was thick with power, and as Taylor stood there, he realized something: this was no longer just a mystery to solve. This was a decision that would shape the future of everything. The core hummed, its light dimming just enough for Taylor to see what lay within its depths. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It was a message from the past, a message from a civilization long gone. And it was up to him to decipher it.